guys, we're with Coach Mark Cornelius here at Holly Pond High School in the science department. Coach C, I really appreciate you agreeing to go through this coaching cycle with me. We've kind of talked a little bit about what to expect. We're going to get some specifics during this pre-conference portion and kind of figure out where we need to go with this. Tell me a little bit about what you're going to be doing in the next few days with your anatomy classes and what period would be good for me to come in.
Okay, we've been breaking down the skeletal system. I've gone over the fundamentals of the skeletal system as far as we've been talking about the foundations, about how the bones get blood, the different systems, what a fracture is, what types of fractures there are, basically the markings that are found on the bone, the diseases that affect the skeletal system, and we're going to take that information and we have started naming the bones. I've done a lab where we placed the bones on the tables, spread them out, they've gone around and identified the name of the bones. We've given a test about as far as being able to identify what's the scientific name of the ankle bone, what's the scientific name of the upper arm bone, and etc. Now, the lesson that we're going to look at is we're going to see if we can take that information and be able to diagram these bones on the skeleton and see if the students can put the bones in the proper location.
Okay. All right. So we're kind of building to a pinnacle point with this lesson, I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay. When would be a good time, and what are kind of the dynamics of your class that you'd like for me to come observe?
My sixth period class would be a good class for you to come into, man. My sixth period anatomy class is all 11th graders, juniors here at Holly Pond High School. It's a small class. There's only 12 students in here, but I think that'd be a good class for you to come in and look at it and see what we're going on and what are advantages and disadvantages of the lesson.
Okay. All right. We've kind of talked a little bit about what's going to happen. Can you give me an overview of your goals within the lesson?
What I want to see if they can do is take the information that we talked about earlier that was on past lessons and see if we can identify the proper bones in the proper location on the skeleton. If they can take the information and apply it, we don't want rote memorization. We want to see if they can practically use it to identify the different major bones of the skeleton and make sure they go in the proper locations.
Okay, so our end result we're looking for here is identification. Are we talking on the skeleton itself? Or are we talking on a pen and paper test? How will you define achievement of these goals that we've talked about?
In order for me to, one of the ways I'm going to assess the goals, I do have several diagrams. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over during our lesson that you'll be in on with us at. We're going to give them a diagram, and we're going to fill out the diagram. I'm going to ask some questions based on previous knowledge to see if they can correctly identify the diagrams. And then I'm going to give them about a week to study the diagrams, and then I'm going to give them another diagram. Now, it's going to be like one of the diagrams we're going to go over during the lesson is the skull. And it won't be just a same diagram as the study guide because I don't want them to memorize it. I want them to be able to look at the bone and know that the anterior bone of the skull is the frontal bone. So it will be a different diagram, but a skull diagram is a skull diagram. But I don't want them to memorize number 1 is frontal, number 2 is sphenoid, stuff like that. So I want to make sure they can be able to look at any diagram and know the proper bones and they go in the proper locations.
Okay. What are some personal goals that you will have that you will kind of judge yourself by on this lesson?
I will. One personal goal as we go around and as we present this lesson, I want to make sure they can basically talk to me and basically tell me information we previously had. I think that would be a good way to measure the success of what we've already done and then apply it to what we're doing. And then the second thing, of course, is see how well they do on the written assessment on the diagrams that we give them after we give them time to study from the diagrams during the lesson.
Okay. All right. Can you describe how your class will approach the class day from the start of them walking in the door after the bell rings until the time the bell rings for them to leave?
Okay. We'll come in and I'll call roll. We'll get them started. I'll introduce the lesson. I will give them some kind of just information, kind of whether it's review from previous lessons or something to get it started, kind of brainstorming technique, and get them talking about some of the bones we've already identified. And then I'll pass out the diagrams and we'll look at it and we'll use the diagrams, we'll use the diagrams in the book, We'll use the skeletons that I have, the different parts of the skeleton that we've taken apart, to see if they can basically take the information and fill out the diagrams in class. And I'll check it. We'll do it together. We're going to do it together as we go through this. So I'll go through them, and we have a diagram of the vertebrae, a diagram of the skull. We have a diagram of the ankle, then the foot and the toes, and we have one of the hand, the wrist, and the fingers. Those are the diagrams that we're going to basically kind of focus in on to see how accurately we can fill those out based on previous lessons that we've taught.
Okay. After seeing the amount of material that your students will have during this lesson, how do you feel like the rigor of this class that I'm coming to see is in comparison with the rest of the days that you have with this anatomy group? Is this a normal amount of rigor for this class, or is this a very challenging lesson for them?
I think it will be a challenging lesson. We try to, all of our anatomy classes, we try to present material where we challenge them enough where they'll be able to take this information and be successful, and then go on to the next level, go to a freshman, sophomore 201 anatomy class, and be successful. They've been given the information. We will make it as rigorous as we can, so they won't be, so to speak, swallowed up, and they'll be used to the amount of information that's presented to them, and so they'll be able to be successful in the next level. That's the goal that we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, so when we talk about success, you mentioned successful a couple of times right there. Plan 2020 talks about expanding our horizons and being ready not just for college but for career as well. When you mean success, what exactly are you talking about by success? Are we talking about grade-wise success, or are we talking about being able to relate knowledge?
I want both. I want them to have great success. But I don't think that's the only thing we need to look at. I think we need to also look at and see if they're going to be able to take the information that we're teaching them and use it in their careers that they're choosing, or whether it be going on to college, or whatever line of profession they want to go into. And one thing good about anatomy that I've always thought I wanted to emphasize in anatomy is they will need this information. It doesn't matter if they're going in the health profession or they're going to have a family, they have kids and they have parents, and different afflictions come upon them. They'll have some idea of some of the information that's being conveyed to them by medical personnel as they're going through this in their daily lives. So I think that's a big part of this, especially in anatomy, not only for them to do well grade-wise, but they'll also be able to understand the information so they can use it in their everyday lives to be successful and have some knowledge and not be scared about things that all of us face different afflictions during our life, and we can take that information and have some knowledge of it, know what they're talking about, and not just be overwhelmed by it.
Absolutely. How did you go about choosing this method for delivery for our bones and system that we're going to talk about?
I think I've always felt like I want to not only identify the information and not only can they tell me what the humerus is, but they can show me where the humerus is. And I wanted them to be able to apply that information to the diagrams as we've gone over it. Kind of not just memorization, but be able to physically show us where the different bones are on the skeleton from what we've already went over in previous classes.
Okay. How will you check for understanding as you lecture? Because this feels kind of a mixed. Would you describe this class as a mixed lecture lab?
Yes.
More than anything?
Absolutely.
Okay. How would you check for understanding as you go along? So you need to know, or how do you know when to push and when to pull back a little bit?
I'm going to ask him. I'll say, all right, look at number 1 on your hand diagram. What is number 1 based on the information we've covered so far in previous classes? And that if they all 10 or 11 of them get it, they tell me in a matter of seconds, then I know, we're ready to move on. If they are hesitant, they don't know, they're unsure, then we need to go back and we need to review and we need to reteach it and hopefully help them at a better rate.
I know another thing that you've said several times during our conversation is you're not big on the memorization. You would rather it be a practical knowledge.
Right.
How will you assess without it necessarily being pen and paper? How will you use the skeleton itself to assess understanding?
Well, and I've talked about having some, if we can get it figured out, maybe have kind of a practical lab. We talked about having a disarticulated skeleton where we put the bones on the table, and in a lab situation where they could use your notes, they could use your book, come in and identify the bone. Well, we may come back and have a test situation where we have the bones out, and I just hold up, or what's the scientific name of the jawbone right here, or what's the scientific name for the upper arm bone, and that kind of understanding, where it's not memorization. They don't know which one I'm going to hold up next, which one I'm going to point to next, to really understand and get a full assessment of what they've been taught and see if they have a good grounding in it, if they understand what we've taught.
Okay. One thing we've also talked about a little bit is how this lesson is reaching almost a pinnacle point. How long have you been preparing these students for this part of your course of study?
We've started the skeletal system about the foundations, about the different inner workings, the marrow of the bone, and all that. We really started in the middle of October. I think I first started going over some introduction material in October the 12th.
Okay.
And like I said, then we picked up after we went over the foundations. Then we started naming the bones. And we've been doing that prior to the lesson that you will observe about a good week. All right. And then we're going to come in now, and based on what we've done as far as naming the bones, and they've had a test on just being able to apply a verbal description of the bones. Now we're going to see if they can locate it on the skeleton. And then after that, we're going to go to the joints and see if they understand how the importance of the joints are to the skeletal system and the bones that make the joints. Of course, joints are where two or more bones meet. And we'll see what, if they can take the information about the bones that they've learned and figure out which two bones are meeting to form the joint and the importance of the joint to the skeletal system, what movements it allows the skeletal system to accomplish.
Okay, so to add on to, instead of plateauing, we're building to our next course of study standard, which seems to be joints. Is that correct?
The joints of the skeletal system will be the very last part that I talk about and teach in this anatomy course with the skeletal system. That will be our last part of the skeletal system. And then from that information now, we still, because skeletal muscles, the bones are attached to the muscles, we're going to move on from the skeletal system to the muscles. So after we deal with the joints and talk about the bones that meet to form the joints and the movements that are accomplished in the joints and the diseases, arthritis and gout and the different rheumatoid and osteoarthritis, then we'll move on to muscles. So yeah, it is a building process that we move on throughout the whole body.
Okay. You seem to have a very good understanding of this lesson. How many years have you taught this particular lesson, and how has this lesson changed throughout your teaching experience?
I've probably taught this lesson for about, I'd say 12 years, 12 to 14 years. I think it's changed. Used to, we'd probably just give them a diagram, go over the diagram, check for understanding of it, and then maybe give them the same diagram for test. And then it's like, well, are they really learning, or are they just memorizing the order in which the diagram is in? So we've changed it where we've gone to get more, and we don't want to trick anybody. That's not what we're in the business for. We want to make sure they understand it. So we get the same type of diagram, but maybe they're in different orders or whatever, and then we give it to them to make sure they understand the information we're talking about this time. So that's kind of how that information has changed.
Okay. How will you decide if we were to take the practical part out of it? How will you decide, based on evidence that the students will present you, whether this lesson is a success or not?
I think the success will determine, can they tell me the different bones and the locations of the bones, and can we look basically on the way they answer questions and they interact in class. I think that'll be a big way. Take away the paper and pencil. I think that'll be a key point in determining whether this lesson was successful or not. How they respond to me in class, how well they know the material in that way, and then of course we will look at the paper material as well.
One part of this experience, one part of this coaching experience, is to collect evidence, not only from you as the teacher, but from the students as well. So, just based on what we've just talked about, it sounds like one piece of evidence is listening to the students, maybe discussing with the students, just me and the students, what have you gained from this? What else would I be able to get from a student, or maybe look at from a student, that I could tell that they're on the same page with you?
I think if the students, first of all, we want them engaged. Make sure they're that they're understanding the information, that they're paying attention to the information, that they're filling out their diagram, make sure it's filled out properly, that there's no confusion about which bone is in which location of the diagram. Those are things I think as you come in and you witness the students and see how the students are interacting, that's how I think you could be able to tell if the students are getting the material correctly or if it's not going in a proper way and it needs to be changed.
Okay, so it sounds like the two things that I can do to collect evidence from students are to talk directly to students and to check their diagrams maybe?
Yes.
Okay, all right. When we talk about collecting evidence, we've talked about collecting from students. However, I'd like to help you. That's why I'm in here. I'm not here to have a gotcha moment. I'm here to learn just like you are. So what are some things that you would like me to collect evidence on based on your presentation of this material?
I want to make sure the students are engaged, that the students are basically interacting with me, to make sure that they are being motivated, that I'm using high motivational questioning techniques from Bloom's taxonomy that are basically getting the kids involved in the class, to make sure they're not bored with it, make sure they're engaged into it, and make sure they're getting something out of it. So I think that's one thing you can make sure and come up with different ideas that I can make it more useful, maybe find more technological ways that we could do it in the lab or do this type of lesson to make it more useful in everyday society. Those are the types of things. I want them engaged. I don't want them to be bored. I want them to get something out of it. And find different ways, maybe go different websites or different things like that to help us make the students engaged at a better rate.
All right. When the students come in, I'm going to have a seating chart of the students and kind of note the engagement, just like you had said. And making that seating chart will help me to relay to you, the student that's in the back right is doing this. Mm-hmm. Is this something that they normally do? And that's something we can talk about.
Sure.
How will the students be situated in the classroom? In other words, is there going to be a specific direction that you normally teach? How do you flow throughout the classroom? Would you like for me to look at that as well?
Sure. I would like, we want to make sure we're reaching the whole students. We have, as you can see, or you will see in here, we have 3 rows of tables here. So I want to make sure I'm going to the left side of the room as well as the right side of the room, and make sure that I'm engaging every student, make sure I'm not teaching just on one side of the room, make sure we're going around in every room, making sure that I'm helping to check the different diagrams to make sure they're getting it in a proper place. And yes, I want to make sure that we're going every location of the room to make sure that no one is left out.
Okay. So some of the evidence, just so we're on the same page here, I'm going to look and make sure for student engagement. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to build a seating chart when the students come in. As you're doing your intro activity like we spoke about earlier, that's one thing I'm going to be doing. So if I'm writing a lot, that's exactly what I'm doing. Within that seating chart, I'll also map how you flow throughout the classroom. If there is maybe something that's going on when you're not in a certain, if there's a correlation, maybe when you move over here, we have something going on behind you that you might not know about anyway. So this is kind of a way to give information to you and let you build off of that. We've had a very good conversation about your lesson as a whole. And we've talked previously about the coaching experience that we're going to go through right now. How is our conversation today and the previous conversations we've had about what I'm doing in your classroom help to clarify things? That way it's not a gotcha moment. You understand why I'm in here.
Well, yeah, I think our conversations have helped me understand exactly what I need to teach and ways I need to teach it and what I'm going to be able to basically be able to accomplish through this lesson, that my objectives are very plainly stated and that we have them stated correctly, and we know what we're going to try, our goal we're going to reach by teaching this lesson, that we're right on task, we don't get off task, and that when we get finished, without a shadow of a doubt, we're going to do our very best to teach the kids to be able to know the bones of the following diagrams that we're presenting that day in class.
Okay, so make sure we're on the same page. I will come Monday during 6th period, and I will observe an anatomy classroom, and we will be talking about bone structure and actual bones.
That is correct.
All right, thanks.
Oh my God, it cut off. It just did though. We're good.